In part 2, we will discuss connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Connective tissue are various types of tissues that are grouped together because of common function. We have loose connective tissue that's seen under the skin, adipose tissue containing fat, blood is a connective tissue since it connects different organs, takes nutritions, takes gases, and even eliminates byproducts from different parts of the body. Then you have items like ligaments, cartilage, and bones that produce certain specialized functions. Different types of tissues grouped together due to its commonality in function, meaning connecting different types of tissues, forms the group of connective tissues. Connective tissue also produces something called the extracellular matrix, where these cells produce and excrete certain types of protein that will form a layer that will help suspend other types of cells. Connective tissue has two main categories. You have connective tissue proper, where you have loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and then you have certain specialized functions in the connective tissue that will contain cartilage, bone, and blood. Loose connective tissue, just as the name says, these cells are loosely arranged. There is a lot of extracellular matrix, and they will form a function to connect different types of tissues together. We see areolar tissue. It underlies the skin tissue and connects epithelial cells to muscle cells. Then you have adipose tissue, still found underneath the skin, maybe between the muscles, around certain organs, and they function to cushion joints and organs, help store energy in the form of fat, and also help insulate the body. Finally, we have reticular connective tissue. These contain some reticular fiber that forms a framework to help keep certain internal organs in place, such as the liver and spleen. Areolar tissue are going to be tissue that you will see that are just randomly arranged. So there is no proper organization, but in the extracellular matrix, you will find collagen fibers, different types of fibers, different spaces, all connecting, as we can see here, interspersed between certain muscle cells. Adipose cells, in the other hand, are going to be much more clear, because if you see these outlines, these are going to be the adipose cells with these nuclei on the periphery, on the side, and full of fat. These are fat droplets, mainly helping contain fat and storing energy. And this is just the skin. This is a hair follicle, and you see the fat that surrounds that. Now, when we discuss about dense connective tissue, they still have an extracellular matrix, but it is minimal as these cells are densely packed, hence the name dense connective tissue. And we see these in the areas that surround certain bones, ligaments, and cartilages. Dense connective tissue, as we saw, could have certain collagen fiber, even ground substances, but they are neatly and densely packed. Cartilage, one of the specialized types of cells, has a very distinct function. Cartilage will act as a cushion between certain bone joints and even have certain other functions in connecting certain bones. There are three types of cartilage. For this course, we don't need to get into too much of the detail as long as students realize that there are three types and maybe be able to identify some of these differences in arrangement. That is all that needs to be known. So we have the hyaline cartilage, where you see these cells are within a certain area and this extracellular matrix is being produced. Then you have fibrocartilage, which are organized in a very organized manner. Then you have this elastic cartilage where there will be this elastin that is produced. So they are going to be in a different arrangement. Hyaline cartilage are going to be seen in these joints between the ribs and the sternum, where, as I mentioned, they are in these locations called the lacunae, and the cells are between them, and then they produce this extracellular matrix that will connect all these cells together. Hyaline cartilage can also be seen on a section where we see the cells arranged in this particular manner. Please know this term lacunae. Lacunae are associated with cartilages where these nuclei or the cartilage cells reside within the lacunae and produce extracellular matrix to be around them. Elastin cartilage, the third type I had mentioned, produces these elastic fibers. Elastic fibers have properties that can extend even these cells remaining within the lacunae, producing these elastic fibers, and we see these in places like the ear. A fibrocartilage, as I mentioned, are going to have still some collagen fibers that are being produced. You still see the cells in these lacunae-like structures. Chondriocytes just mean they are the tissues or the cells that produce the cartilage, but that term is not that important. As long as student can see the arrangement, how this extracellular matrix is produced, and know kind of the difference between the different cartilages, that's going to be good enough. So we will see fibrocartilages between the bones of your spine. Elastic cartilage, we've already seen the elastin being produced, and this is what it will see under a section, a cross section, where you see the arrangement of these cells and the extracellular matrix all surrounding them. Fibrocartilage, a much better arrangement. You have these collagen fiber that is deposited around these cells, the chondriocytes that are within the lacunae. So the next specialized tissue that we'll discuss is the bone tissue. A bone tissue is the extracellular matrix produced by osteons or the osteocytes, which are the bone cells. So you'll see these osteocytes. Osteocytes are going to be the cells that produce the bone. They will reside within an osteon, just like we had in the cartilage. We will also see a lacunae structure here for the bone cells to reside, and they will produce these extracellular matrix that will surround all these cells, producing the bone structure. So we have this osteon where we will have the different osteocytes lining them, and this central canal. Since these since these cells are densely packed, there needs to be certain way where blood vessels can bring nutrition, can bring oxygen to these cells. So these central canals will be used for that, and they will be arranged in these structures. And we see these osteocytes in lacunae, these spaces where these osteocytes will reside. Bones also have something called the spongy bones. These are the bones where most of our bone marrow will be located, in long bones where blood is being produced. So in addition to the extracellular matrix that the osteocytes produce, you will see these spaces that will allow even blood to be included there. So the third and the final specialized type of tissue for connective tissue is going to be blood. It's not a static type of tissue that stays in one place. It is a fluid, and the blood will have certain types of blood cells, plasma, and even platelets. So white blood cells, red blood cells, plasma, and platelets will produce the blood connective tissue. Here is also an example showing the different types of cells. We have the erythrocytes shown here in blue, or the red blood cells, neutrophils, one type of white blood cell, and then we have platelets shown with these small dots. These are the ones that will help in blood clotting. So even though it's a fluid, we have these cells that form this fluid connective tissue. Next, we look at muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is another connective type of tissue, and there are three types of muscle tissue. You have skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle is going to be arranged in these long bundles where you will have these cells that are going to be, we see these nuclei and we also see these striations. These are these dark and light bands, which we will talk in more detail in future lectures. When we see these striations, we will know that this is going to be um, skeletal muscles. So you will have these striations and you will have these arrangement this way. So looking at just a tissue section, we will see these striations. We have these different bands, the A band, the I band, and the nuclei. As I mentioned, these will be discussed more in a future lecture. Smooth muscles, as the name implies, these muscles are going to be muscles that don't have striations. They are arranged um, just again with their nuclei and the entire cell. And these muscles are going to be involuntary muscles. They are not under our control. Smooth muscle cells. Here we show smooth muscles, a longitudinal section along them, and also a cross section that is just looking at the individual cells that we can see. Looking at high magnification, again, we see that the nuclei will sometimes take most of the part of the smooth muscle section, but they still have their contractile function. The third type of muscle cells are going to be these cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscles are also going to be striated muscles, similar to the uh, muscle fibers that we saw in skeletal muscles. However, we will also see these branching of these muscles. So rather than being just individual long muscles, we will see a branching and something called intercalated discs. So intercalated discs are going to be distinct lines that will separate different cardiac cells from each other. So again, these muscles are going to be involuntary control, and they are going to form the heart tissue, and they will have striations, their nuclei, and these intercalated discs distinguishing the different cells. So to be able to identify cardiac muscle cells, we will see these branched cells, the intercalated discs, and then the nuclei that will be between these cells. We will discuss more detail about these tissue types, muscles, in a separate lecture. For now, as long as students can identify them separately, that will be good. The last type of tissue that we will discuss is going to be the nervous tissues. These are the tissues that will help take messages from the one part of the body to another, and their cells are arranged in that manner. The only thing that I would want for students to know is to be able to identify these cells as nervous tissue just by looking at their arrangement, where we will have the cell body of these cells and these different processes, long processes that will help these cells to connect with other nerve cells and transmit messages. So you have these neurons, and in the neurons you have these short branches, short uh, podii, structures called the dendrites. And then you have this long arm that we will call the axon. And each of these have a nuclei in them. And then sometimes the nuclei could be outside of the cell body, and they will be called glial cells. So that's all we have for this lecture. As long as students are able to identify the different types of connective tissue, be able to identify them on some of these histological slides, that will be sufficient for this lecture.